let's see. Yeah, and be patient with us. This is the first time that we've done it where everybody is in a different room. So we're bound to have a glitch or two. And Marshall has to leave to go teach at the college later, so I'll be finishing up the session. Our speaker today is Louise Sullivan-Blum, a longtime resident of the Twin Tiers and professor emeritus and professor of English at Mansfield University. Louise has also held many other positions involving writing, community organizing, and prison inmate advocacy. She has published 2 books, a novel and a memoir, as well as dozens of essays, poems, and short stories. Her love of libraries and longtime interest in history make her an ideal reviewer of the book Women of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. And those of you who are devoted book sandwiched in people may remember her presentation of The Power 2 years ago. Welcome back, Louise, to Book Sandwiched In, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Louise. I am okay. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. So first of all, I was just wondering how many of you have read the book? And if you'd just raise your hands. Okay. And I look forward to hearing what you thought about it. So my take on this book is that the author brought together 2 of her interests, the pack horse librarians of the 1930s and the blue-skinned people of Kentucky. Each of these certainly deserves its own book. Putting the 2 together was a lot. So it wasn't the best written book I've ever read, but I did find it deeply compelling for many reasons. The author gives us the story through the eyes of Cussie Mary, a blue-skinned young woman with a coal miner father, both living in desperate poverty in a shack deep in a Kentucky holler. Using first-person narration, Richardson gives us Cussie's story in her own particular dialect. In some ways, this enhances the novel, letting us really get to know Cussie and the deep rejection that she experiences. In other ways, however, it keeps it from being a truly poetic and thoughtful read. The use of dialect is a tricky art, and while for the most part the author does a good job with it, there are places where the voice slips a bit, and places where Richardson's efforts to be true to the dialect give the narrative a kind of clunkiness. But there are also places where it sings, and there are moments to be treasured, such as this one, where she encounters a rattlesnake on the trail and is rescued by one of her most beloved clients, Angeline, who shoots it and then takes it home for dinner. She looked a little wild standing there, fierce, her tanned feet comfortable atop ancient knobby tree roots like the earth was her Cinderella slipper. The loose plait in her light hair glistened in a blade of sunlight. For a minute I envied her, wanted to send Junia home, unlace my heavy, tight shoes and run free with her to escape Fraser, the doc, and his medical tests, and everything damning me, to hunt and fish in the woods like I'd done as a child, to be wilded, have a wilded heart in this black-treed land full of wilded creatures. There were notches in these hills where a stranger wouldn't tread, dared not venture. The needle-eyed coves and skinny blinds behind rocks, the strangling parts of the black and green hills. But Angeline and the hill folk here were wilded and not afraid. And I longed to lift bare feet onto ancient paths and be wilded once again. I love history, so I was excited to learn about the WPA's Pack Horse Library Project, which was designed to hire people, mostly women, to provide books to people living in rural Kentucky from 1935 to 1943. Through Cussie's character, we get a first-hand look at the incredible hard work of these librarians, known colloquially as bookwomen. The women spent hours every day traveling by mule, horse, or on foot, traversing cliffs and streams, often at great personal risk, to bring books to people who had nothing. A lot of the residents of these hills were sick or illiterate, and if they couldn't read, it was part of the bookwomen's job to read to them. They brought them more than books and magazines and newspapers. They brought them news from town, they brought them companionship, and they brought them connections to at least a small part of the outside world. The poverty in this area is desperate. One of the towns is called Hell for Certain, pronounced Hell for Certain. And you can see why when you read this. The children suffer a ropey pellagra rash caused by vitamin deficiency before they die a slow and agonizing death from starvation. People paper their walls with newspaper the librarians bring them, both for decoration and to give themselves some protection from the cold. And the coal miners, paid in scrip and kept in debt to the company store, suffer miserable conditions and are repeatedly killed by cave-ins and lung disease. Of course, Cussy Mary isn't just a bookwoman living in poverty herself, which would be enough to carry the story. She's also part of a group of people who are ostracized because of their blue skin. She is, her father tells her, the last of the blues. A group of people descended from a French orphan, Martin Fugate, who arrived in Troublesome Creek from France in 1820. The blue skin color is a genetic disorder caused by a recessive gene that keeps the blood from carrying enough oxygen to the tissues, resulting in chocolate-covered blood and skin that could range from a pale blue to what is described in the book as blue as lake water on a bright day, to plum purple. The condition itself is harmless when it's congenital, as it is in this case. Most of the Fugates lived to their 80s and 90s. Martin, whose own skin was a dark blue, married a red-headed white woman who happened to carry the same recessive gene. We know she also had the gene because of their 7 children, 4 were blue. Because of the extreme isolation of the area and the discrimination they faced, the Fugates stayed together. Intermarriage increased the prevalence of the gene, but by the time the novel takes place, the few remaining blues had been hunted nearly to extinction. As far as Cussy knows, she and her pa are the only blues left. It's a lot to pack into one book, which is another problem I had with it. Cussy faces considerable cruelty from the people of Troublesome Creek, which is not unexpected given humanity's xenophobic tendencies, but pretty much everything that could possibly happen to Cussy Mary does happen. So there's continuous mockery and discrimination from the townspeople. There's a forced marriage arranged by her father, who is desperate to get her settled before he dies of black lung. He marries her off to the only man who will take her. It occurs to me that I'm about to give you a lot of spoilers, and I don't know if that's okay, but well, you can just not listen for a couple minutes. All right, the only man who will take her, a 62-year-old man who puts a pillow over her face so he doesn't have to look at her before he violently beats and rapes her. Fortunately, he has a heart attack immediately afterwards and dies. She also has a self-induced abortion with the aid of tansy tea, which Cussy brews herself to get rid of his devil seed. She's stalked both on her route and at home by a deranged preacher who wants either to impregnate her in order to dilute her ungodly color or kill her. When she agrees to allow the local doctor to study her color, her treatment at the hands of medical people who see her not as a person, but as an interesting case to be studied, is brutal. She suffers multiple losses as the people around her die to mine accidents, poverty, and starvation. Her father is spared dying of black lung when he is crushed to death in the mines after he tries to help unionize his fellow mine workers. Her favorite child at the school she travels to, a selfless little boy who gives her his last piece of candy, starves to death. Her friend bleeds to death after giving birth while her husband is out hanging himself from a tree because it turns out their baby is blue. When she finally finds joy in marrying the man she's come to love, he's beaten within an inch of his life by the sheriff, thrown in jail, and banished from Kentucky. Their marriage is immediately deemed illegal on the grounds of miscegenation laws. When Cussy tries to fight back, the sheriff threatens to jail her and put her baby in the home for the idiots. Now, I don't doubt for a second that all this could happen to one person. It happens all the time. But the trouble with writing a novel is this: just because it happened in real life doesn't make it good fiction. I don't know how to explain it other than that, but as a writer, it's taken me a long time to learn that. Nonetheless, despite all that, I found this book intensely compelling and extremely relevant to where we are today. The prejudice faced by the blue-skinned people makes for a unique commentary on race. People don't even want to touch Cussie for fear that her blueness might be catching. But there are people who see past that. At one point, Angeline takes her hand. When Cussie tries to draw back, Angeline says, "Hain't no harm. Our hands don't care they's different colors. Feels nice just the same, huh?" The conditions the miner faced are still faced by people all around the world. At one point, when Cussie's father heads off to a union meeting, she begs him not to go. Here's his response. Pa's voice cracked. Boss man told old Jonah he just bought himself a dead ass and then put a rock on the poor feller's pay. A man best not let one of them company mules get killed or harmed down there unless it's for checking leaks. They'll fire or suspend you like that. Like that. Pa snapped his fingers. But let a miner lose his limbs or die in that black hellhole and they don't blink. Just replace him. They're stealing the very breath of the Kentucky man, the land. He knocked back a cough. It's all disappearing, daughter. The tracks of muck in and out of this town, up our brown dying mountains, up. Pa's anger throbbed in his hardening jaw and he hacked again. Up our dying ass. The devil company won't release its tether on us till they are good and sure they've fattened themselves on our black gold, spent us and not a fast Kentucky second sooner. I hope I'm doing this voice okay. It's hard not to, actually, when reading it. The distrust people have for the government and FDR's WPA program is rigid, and it's something I don't think I knew about before. I mean, really. One of Cussie's book clients, RC, who works at the fire tower watching for fires, falls in love and asks the girl's father for permission. The man turns him down because he wants his daughter to marry a coal miner. In that passage, the boy's very upset. So he says, "He done said no," RC murmured, swiping the back of his hand across his lids. "No. Said I wasn't good enough for Ruth and my work ain't honorable and I ain't got myself a proper home for his daughter. He aims to have her take a coal miner for a husband." He thrust a fisted letter into the air. A coal miner. Look, he lifted the paper and tapped the page. He says he won't give her hand to anyone in the We Poke Along program. Calls it lazy work. I winced. That's what some folks call the WPA program. A lot of men around these parts would rather starve than participate. They thought it was charity, dishonorable, and downright sinful to take the 75 cents a day the government offered to erect simple outdoor privies for folks who had none, build access roads into the hills and around, or lay split timber bridges across creeks. Lazy work, the prouder hillman claimed. And the sexism and the misogyny, it's extreme in this book, and it's extreme in real life. The book women are a brave lot, and I hope that if I'd been alive in Kentucky in the 30s, I would have been one of them. There is much, much more to talk about, but it would take more time than we have here today, and I'm hoping to hear what some of you think about all this. At its heart, this is a book about the hard work that librarians do and have always done in their communities, and the importance of books in finding both knowledge and connection. It's about learning to accept yourself for who you are and stand up for yourself. It's about sacrifices people are willing to make in order to help one another. And it's about how, with enough luck and time, there's a good chance that love will triumph over hate. It's not a glossy romance. The ending is more realistic than it is happy, but because of that, it's very satisfying. I appreciated reading about these rugged women and their journeys to bring the joy of reading to people with very little other joy in their lives. I found the intricacies of the blue skin gene intriguing, and I could tell that the author deeply loves both her characters and the real people they're based on. I would certainly recommend it, especially right now, when we can all use a good book that reminds us that hatred and violent acts are nothing new, and neither is the courage to fight them. So that's all that I have, and I hope to hear from you. But I know that Zoom is a really hard venue for that. But let's see.
Okay. Anybody, let me know in the chat if you have something to say. And while you're figuring out what that might be, um, Louise sent me her list of questions last night, and I read over them. And the one that, or comment points that struck me was the notion of the importance of the library to poor people. And that has certainly translated into the 21st century. I think in many ways, the most striking is the fact that we have computers that are available on the internet to people who don't have that either internet access at home or simply don't have even the hardware. Pauline tells a wonderful story that's not unique about a man who came in to use the computers and worked with our wonderful librarians because he needed to find a job. And the only way that he could apply for that job is via the internet. And he had no way to do that. So not only did we provide him with the computer, the librarians walked him through how to do it and how to build a resume and so on and so forth. And I remember as a trustee reading a note from him telling us that he had gotten the job and how thankful he was to everybody at the library and what we provided. So I do have some comments here. I don't know if people want to speak for themselves. I can read through some of these. If you want to speak for yourself, say so in the chat. Made me realize how much we take for granted. I take the library for granted, and that's another form of privilege. Haven't read the book, but I was fascinated by the story, had no idea that there were traveling librarians. Were they mostly women? If so, do you know why it seems like arduous work? And let me finish these, and then Louise, you can talk to that. Also liked how there are connections between this book and White Fragility, which is the book that we did last week. Color is a social construct. Even when they took medicine to change her outward appearance, she would still be considered colored. Yeah, so do you want to speak to any of that, Louise?
Sure. They were mostly women, and they were actually women. They were supposed to be unmarried, because if they were married, then the man was supposed to be the provider. But in a lot of cases, they were the only provider in the family. So there were men, but men were working in the mines if they were working, or
Building
they didn't
things.
have access. But yes, mostly they were women. And also, although there is a Black traveling librarian in the book, a character, there were no, apparently, Black bookwomen in reality.
Anyone else? Can I follow up about the white fragility question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so Bev and somebody else, I'm sorry, Barbara, I think, brought this up. And I thought that was really an interesting connection, because as Bev was saying in her comment about our privilege and how we take the library for granted. And then as Barbara was saying in her comment about how the blue people of Kentucky are seen as colored and are therefore don't have the accessibility to white privilege, such as it was in that part of Appalachian at that time. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like there really are deep connections there, where we begin to be so entitled that we forget the real services that libraries provide, and the real effect that they have on people's lives. So you know, it's fascinating to me to just think about the way in which there was a structure provided to get literature out to the poor people, even people who couldn't read it themselves. Um, so I don't know. I just wondered, Louise, if you could speak a little bit to that, to those connections.
I think one thing, I mean, I was just rereading Barb's comment about the, you know, when she took the medicine to change her outward appearance, she'd still be considered colored. And one of the things that she realizes is that, yes, she's still considered colored, and that, yes, who she is going to have to be enough because the side effects are too much. And at one point, when the guy that loves her tells her, you know, you don't have to feel bad for, you know, your color, you're beautiful. I mean, you don't have to be white. And she's furious with him. And she says, you had no idea what my experience is because you're white. You've never been colored. So don't tell me how to feel. And it's one of those moments where I thought, yeah. And I think the librarians, I was just floored by what I considered their heroism in working that hard. And I think that libraries are important. I know that when they were closed because Governor Cuomo did not consider them an essential service like liquor stores, that you know, Pauline made sure that people could sit in the parking lot and use the wireless. And I know that a lot of students who are taking online classes don't have access to wireless, and they'd be sitting in the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot or somewhere just to find a place to connect. And libraries have a crucial part to play in all of this.
So some more comments. Interesting, they were mistrustful of the WPA and that it was less prestigious than being a coal miner. I mean, we all understand the WPA is this amazing program that helped the country move forward and did really interesting things like art projects and building projects and so forth. So yeah, I think that was really interesting. Then let's see. Oh, yeah, there's a comment about, I don't know if anyone on the call has read Giver of Stars, I believe it's called, by Jojo Moyes, who is sort of a popular writer. There have been some allegations of plagiarism with this book. I don't think much has really come of that, although when I read about it and it seemed plausible to me. But the other comment there from Kate is, I read that book and hearing Louise's description of this book, that book clearly whitewashed everything. And I think that is the difference. It was sort of more of a feel-good book. Another one, my first formal paid job was in high school when I worked for Steele Memorial Library as a page for the Bookmobile. We went to rural areas, shopping centers, and Jones Court Housing Project in Elmira. Wasn't part of our job, but I remember reading to poor kids who were reading way below grade level, and they loved being read to. Oh, I met a woman who came into the library every Saturday to read because her son felt it was frivolous and she couldn't read at home.
I'd just like to say that in my family, reading was considered frivolous, and I read constantly. I carried 2 books around at a time so I could start one the minute I finished the one, you know, that I was reading. And my mother said, you know, you're using books to escape reality. And my brother would say, you know, I don't see where people get all this time to sit around and read. And it's amazing to me that that is still a prevalent, or can be a prevalent feeling about reading.
Mm-hmm. And another, so this is again about the Jojo Moyes book. There's discussion about the segregation of libraries during the time. The largest public library in Louisville had a separate colored library with at least some non-white staff librarians. So that, I guess, is speaking to that there weren't Black pack horse librarians. Is there any information about the author and what might have motivated the book? So, oh, that was to me, but yeah, I don't remember. I read this a while ago.
There, I can
Okay.
speak to that. At the end of the book, they have an interview with the author, and they also, just to speak to the previous comment, they have a picture in here of a Black family reading, and it says, library service was not restricted. White families, Black families, and teachers had the opportunity to benefit by library use. Library centers for Blacks were established in Black communities. But I think this author is from Kentucky. I mean, this is, I think, this story's in her blood. And I didn't read Jojo Meyer's book, but I did read about the controversy. And she's British. What does she know?
Right. Yeah.
And then I see that one about Kristen Hanna also writing a book.
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
That was me, and I just had the author wrong. I
Oh,
was talking
okay.
about. Sorry,
I wondered about that.
I'm old.
And does Pauline have her hand up, or is that just?
Oh, Pauline. Pauline, you have something to say?
If she doesn't, can I respond to Barb's comment about the pauper's oath?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't see that. Yes, of course.
That was one of the things that her Cussie's father is furious about the WPA and everything, because the mine shut down, and she says, well, you could get a job with the WPA. And he says, beg for scraps, take the government's release. He says, do you mean for me to take their pauper's oath? And then she says, anybody who wanted a job with the WPA had to swear to poverty, take the oath, and leave their pantries and cupboards open in case a government man might happen by and snoop around to make sure you were remaining good and poor. I had no idea that happened. Although I guess for a little while I worked in Atlanta in the Department of Family and Children's Services, and I used to watch all the people sitting in the waiting room and think, yeah, here you guys are snooping through every single piece of paper and every dime that they make. And so maybe it hasn't changed.
Then I took literacy volunteer training. One of the things that stuck in my mind was we were told that we were all interested in reading, but don't expect the people you would teach would develop a love of reading and would read for pleasure. Instead, they would be motivated by things like reading their kids' report card, passing a job-related certificate exam, or getting short order quick requests, right? An eye-opener. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in some cases and absolutely untrue in others. I don't know. I remember being absolutely floored, and I think I was a grown-up or at least a teenager when I realized so I always thought, well, people who can't read aren't enjoying the joys of reading. And then it's like, oh, wait, no, they can't read a road sign. They can't fill out an application, which is me wearing my privilege. Yeah, and from Connie, because we were convinced that there are deserving, the deserving and the undeserving poor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people choose to be poor. Going back to WPA and attitude towards it, does that have tones of hillbilly elegy. What goes around comes around. Well, I won't tell you what I think about that book, but. And then Barbara, Meritocracy at its best. So.
I think also, I mean, I spent 30 years teaching English, mostly at Mansfield University. And I think I was probably 20 years into that job before I realized that many of my students said that if they could choose to, they wouldn't go to college at all. They'd get a job, but they were only in college in order to get a job. And that was where, I mean, they were, a class difference really struck me there between me and them, because I was expected to go to college and college was the way to a good job. But what they wanted was, to have the kind of job that their parents and grandparents had where you didn't have to go to college. And when I look at debt, student loan debt, I mean, no wonder, I mean, they just wanted to earn a living and start their lives. And it's a different way of looking at it.
For people who are really interested in sort of that topic and the way that we judge people by credentials and by their privilege and where they came from and so forth, I just read Michael Sandel's book Meritocracy, which is fascinating. There's so much in it to make you think. I finished it probably 2 weeks ago and I'm still processing it, but I'd recommend it to anybody who's really interested in where we are in this country right now and how we got here. Anyone else?
Well, to end on a more positive note, maybe. I think one of the things, and Louise, I believe you touched on it, that was very impressive was way with the bookwoman kind of as the conduit. These women all came together to help each other. Those little books that they put together where they shared recipes and shared magazine articles, and how precious things, again, goes back to what I said before, things that we just throw away and don't think about, how precious they were and how they held on to them and kind of built each other up. I thought was a nice theme as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I will say that if you have not read this book and you're intrigued, you can get it right now at the, if you go to the library's website and go to services and find the link to Hoopla, you can download the ebook or the audiobook. I actually listened to this book and thought it was a terrific recording. So I'd urge you to do that. And we have a couple more comments here. Oh yeah, Lisa's saying she first heard about the Pack Horse Librarians in the book Library by Susan Orlean, which Pauline reviewed for us last year. And let's see, difference between rural and urban libraries. Said to Pauline the other day, I couldn't love librarians anymore after reading this book. It's hard to love librarians more, but then every day they give you another reason. Yeah. Yeah, so this is a good time to give a shout out to everybody at our library for what they've done during this pandemic. Not only have people been able to sit in the parking lot and use the Wi-Fi, but the availability of digital downloads of books certainly got me through the first many months of this, as well as all the online programming that Sue McConnell has done with her story hours, and Abby has done with her science projects, and guests have done on all sorts of subjects. It's been absolutely remarkable. And we've gotten a whole lot of feedback from moms and dads who've been home with their children, and what a lifesaver those story hours have been. And they're all recorded and available on the library's YouTube channel. So check it out. And and one more shout out. Southern Tier Library System recently got a nice grant from the Corning Incorporated Foundation to put what I think of as Wi-Fi boosters, I don't know what they're officially called, in the parking lots at member libraries in Steuben and Chemung County, so that the Wi-Fi signal will travel even longer. Some of the rural libraries actually had to sit on the front steps to get the Wi-Fi signal, but we'll be enjoying the benefit of that as well. So thank you to Corning Incorporated. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you, Louise, so much. Terrific as usual. The next session is next Wednesday. Gary Fitzpatrick will review The Splendid and the Vile, a saga of Churchill family and defiance during the Blitz, by Eric Larson, who's a very popular nonfiction writer. And so we hope you'll join us for that. I don't know if it's available. I listened to the audiobook from the library via Libby. I didn't think to check on Hoopla. The great thing about Hoopla, for those of you who haven't used it yet, is that it's not a queue where if there's a really popular book, you have to wait for everybody else to listen to it or read it. It's available to anybody to download anytime, and you can keep them for, I think, 21 days. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.